will devote to discussing the units of JADS. And today's unit topic is about data entrepreneurship. And we have a number of esteemed guests, and the lady sitting next to me is Ksenia Podornicina, and she will, together with me, host a number of guests, and we hope to engage in very fruitful discussions about the future of this very important and almost dominant, I would say, subject of one of the units that we have. So before we start, ladies and gentlemen, a number of rules of courtesy. I'm sure that you are familiar with them. So we would like to kindly ask you to turn off your cameras until the moment that you would like to engage in the discussion. You can make that known to us by raising your hand. Until then, we kindly ask you to mute. The session is being recorded, so we hope that we have your consent. The fact that you are still with us notifies that, because you clicked on the button accept, which is great. There will be a number of moments in time when we can engage together in having questions and answers. So please make use of this interaction. And if there is anything you would like to share between you as an audience, you can use the chat and we will follow the chat. So let's have a look at the program for this evening. So as I already mentioned, we will discuss the subject of the unit headed by Ksenia Podornicina. It's on the future of data entrepreneurship within the context of JADS. And we will have some 4 deep dives with esteemed guests that we will introduce to you one in a row. So that brings me to the point, Ksenia, where we can introduce you. So welcome to the table. Could you please tell us a little bit, what is the responsibility of a unit leader within JADS?
The way I see that, at least personally, I know that different unit leaders have different opinions on it, is that someone who helps grow the group, basically. Nurturing it, helping people within the group, helping them find interesting, do interesting projects, participating in some of them, not all of them for sure, because that's just infeasible. And making the connections as well. So also seeing those connections and making those connections between the research, teaching, and industrial projects and research collaboration.
Yeah, but I can imagine that on the one hand side, you have your own professional career. So you are an associate professor at this moment, and you are making progress in the development.
Hopefully.
Yes, I'm almost sure about that. So that's your personal development. And on the other hand, you have to take care of the group, so stimulate the group members to pursue their own careers. How can you balance that act?
It's a tricky one. I can be quite open about this. And in some cases, I see the connections. Of course, the easiest ones are the ones that are within my own research area, so to say. So then it's really easy, because I talk to those people quite naturally. So it's kind of really easy to make the connections and help them as well. So the other people who do not directly collaborate yet, I would say, but those in the future are, I think, also special care, need special care, and that's also that the difference between the leader versus a researcher, just a general kind of average researcher in that regard. So really need also to take care of the other people that are also within the unit, but are not directly, not exactly on my within my research area, but are still there. And still also,
alive and kicking, as we call it.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you look at, let's say, the context of JADS, because JADS is really, let's say, a unique academic center in terms of education and research, and also creating impact on the interface of data and entrepreneurship. But it's really, your unit is name giving to JADS, so maybe it was the other way around. I don't know. I don't recall that anymore.
In the positioning of this, I can see the
do you have enough, let's say, room to maneuver within JADS to, on the one hand side, let's say, develop your own career perspective and path that goes with it. And on the other hand, stimulate, let's say, the young researchers that would like to do the same.
I think the challenge specifically for the unit that I see is that it's, I would say, the most interdisciplinary unit. If I'm looking at the types of research that we're doing, and I'm pretty sure that if I point somebody in the unit, then all of them are literally connecting different disciplines, are at interfaces of different knowledge areas. So that's something that is really characteristic of this specific unit, which is indeed very, true to the core of what JADS is, bridging the, the different worlds, including the two universities with the social sciences and data science and AI backgrounds, but many different aspects as well, including research teaching or the professional life, company life. So I think the main challenge is in this interdisciplinarity. So it's the fun part. It's everything comes with with pros and cons and has two sides. The medal has two sides. So in this regard, it's the strong part of the unit, but it also makes it harder to connect to different to certain projects, certain activities. So it's there are some areas within JADS also which are slightly more kind of mono disciplinary oriented. So it's somewhat easier to position those research areas, I feel. So I think it's the main challenge for the data entrepreneurship unit is specifically this kind of connecting, being at the crossroads. As it's also, multiple definitions of what entrepreneurship is in itself, but one of the most famous definition is indeed of the crossroads itself.
Yes.
So that whenever we have a discipline which is defined as crossroads, and you combine it with another discipline, positioning that discipline also at the crossroads, it kind of
So maybe this is a good moment in time. I know that you, let's say, prepared a short presentation for us to give us a glance of what happens in the groups and also the group members. Could I please invite you to show us the members of the group and also what they are doing?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
Those are the members of the group. So I really like the pictures. So it was also an interesting one because when you see the names, you kind of don't really pay attention to the even the gender balance in that regard. So it was interesting to me. So hey, we actually have a lot of females in there, which I didn't realize that clearly before. So,
no, it's good. So it comes naturally then.
It's but it's a healthy balance. So I think we're roughly almost 50-50 with that regard. So we have different people in there, and I'll be also later on. So first of all, kind of show the three main themes that we collectively also with the whole unit defined. That's what we stand for, what type of research we do, which ideally will also translate into teaching, of course, and in a practical project. And then I'll highlight a few of those and also with the names. So the names will come back later as well. Not all of them, unfortunately, because we don't have the time for that, but at least some of them. So before I go into that, I think one of the reasons why data entrepreneurship research is important is that what we see happening is this digital transformation in many different contexts. And I really like this specific metaphor of digital vortex, where you can see digitization, digital technologies at the center, and then kind of expands and impacts increasingly all the markets, all the industries. Started with the media and entertainment, so I know that Martine will be joining the table later, so it's a very dear context to him, which was also one of the early kind of pioneers in digital transformation. But you see that it's really impacting pretty much all of them in different ways and different manners, but still all the industries are inevitably impacted by that, and new business opportunities come up, new startups arise, hence it's important to understand the dynamics. If we look at the research themes that the union has, then they can, all the different projects can be largely divided into those three themes that you see here. So the first one is more on the applications of big data and AI for business. So what does it mean? That this digital transformation, digital disruption that is ongoing. So what does it mean for businesses? How can they benefit from that? What dangers this entails? What are the potential trade-off effects in there? The second theme is slightly more, I would say, classical research oriented. So it's more on the use of the innovative methods of data science and AI methods for entrepreneurship research. And here, whenever I mention that, it's also, I think, good to say and reflect on what we mean by entrepreneurship, because we also explicitly discussed that. And we do see entrepreneurship relatively broad as a kind of entrepreneurial activity, which could also happen within the larger corporates very specifically. And we see that also happening quite consistently across many different settings. So entrepreneurship is not often the classical garage type of entrepreneurship, setting up a venture, but just really corporate entrepreneurship as well. And then the third theme is also very interdisciplinary in itself. So it's about data-driven decision-making tools. So how, once we have the models, how that translates into actions, into, how they fit into different organizational processes, how they impact that, and how people view that. So that's, I think, also a very interesting one. And also the way we see that is that teams are very complementary. So it's also not that they're exclusive. So quite often you see that one project can be actually is doing two things at the same time. For example, combining the second and the third, or second and the first one, which is of course also interesting to see. To kind of start to get a bit closer on the examples, so if we talk about the first theme's implications of big data and AI for business, then, for example, I can mention the project which we do in collaboration with JADS, one of our strategic partners. And they were specifically interested in digital transformation, digital disruption in healthcare. So how would the health insurance business look like in a few years' time, and what should they do to capitalize on this transformation? What can they, how can they steer that? How can they improve that? Another example would be, designing, scaling up platforms, streaming platforms specifically. So that is something I anticipate that we'll get into further discussion with the deep dive number 4 with the KPM cooperation. So just again, another example of this research thing within the unit. And then the second theme is, there are multiple examples in there. So also they'll be definitely coming along in the second and the third deep dive. And then the third theme, so data-driven decision-making tools. I think one very vivid example would be the recommender systems that Martine will be discussing in the first deep dive.
Yes.
So we'll have, by the end of the session, probably everybody will have a very deep understanding of how the three themes are, how did it look like. So here I would like also to present research of other people in the unit. So Plato is one example in here. So he has background, he's quite well quantitatively schooled, but he also has a background within both entrepreneurship and psychology. So it's also somebody who's in the interface. So that's multiple interfaces are there, also inherently interdisciplinary oriented and interested. So that's why he ended up working in that. And the project that he would like to share is the one on following entrepreneurs, and specifically, so people say a lot, entrepreneurship, failing a venture, it's part of the game, and you have to learn to fail in order to be a good entrepreneur. So it's easy said than done. And essentially, he focuses on that. What does it make to a person? So what do we see in terms of the emotional experience of the entrepreneurs whose ventures have failed? So he collected the Twitter data, analyzed that pretty substantial sample, then analyzed what this failure made to the emotions of entrepreneurs, how they felt and how they expressed that on tweet. And then you see that the entrepreneurs were generally less happy, which makes sense, of course. But at the same time, they were in general less anxious and more calm than non-failed entrepreneurs, something that was not kind of not immediately anticipated. So it kind of probably because of the struggles that they experienced in the last days or last months of the venture living, they really feel like, okay, now it's a closure, then I can let it go, and then they feel calmer and more relaxed. So that's one example. Another example is from Naomi, PhD student in the unit, and she's working with JADS, so another project that I've mentioned. already. And this specific study is focusing essentially on the hidden synergies between companies. So if we look at the merger and acquisition world, it's one of the most actively used ways to grow a business. So if a certain company wants to get some kind of expertise, some knowledge, capabilities, and grow really fast, then they revert to merger and acquisitions. But at the same time, whenever they're doing that, they do not like to disclose reasons for competitive reasons, obviously. So what you see then in the press release is that they say something really fuzzy, like, "Oh, we do that to get a better competitive position, or to expand our portfolio," or something like that. So it's something that is really non-transparent. So what we essentially do is that we, or Naomi in this specific case, is scraping the website also historically, so through Wayback Machine, and then doing topic models on the corpora to see what are the connections. So which topics are there? So what are the, what do those companies do that are being acquired? How does that relate to what the acquirer is doing? So what does the target do? What does the acquirer do? And where do we see the disparities? So there are certain topics that are done by both companies, so kind of establishing the common ground, and some things that are really clearly complementary, so that the acquirers are looking for in the targets to channel digital efforts. So that's another example. This example comes from Roger Lehmans, so it's also quite a intricate constellations with PhD students, master's students, and fellow researcher in there. And I think also the interesting part in here is that they're looking at the GDPR compliant. I also like that you mentioned that here as well. Email interactions between employees to specifically identify how employees react to certain interventions from the management side, and that could be interventions to make sure that innovation efforts are being picked up, and then it's really hard for the management to understand, okay, so what is actually working, what is not working, because the feedback is also, if they're talking to you, then they're saying, oh yes, it's wonderful, and then when they're talking to each other, then you see a different picture. So it's it's an objective, transparent way to understand what's happening with the organization once you implement certain measures. And I think they also doing a very interesting job in analyzing this network data. Another network somehow we have a small bias with examples in this part of the story, at least on the network side, is the competition network. So also something that whenever we're talking about businesses, no business exists in isolation. All businesses are always in competition with each other, and the very interesting phenomena due to digitization is that the industry boundaries are blurring. So the competition really becomes almost hyper competition in certain domains. And then as you can see in this example here, so on one hand side, YouTube is in competition with Prime Video, with Disney Plus, for example, with Videoland. But at the same time, they also compete with a quite different set of companies, including Coursera, Udemy, and even now the two mother universities, because it's also they do offer educational videos in there. So this again highlights that the nature of competition is really becoming more and more complex. And this specific project is really quite innovative in the sense that it focuses on this network structure of competition, and also looking at both sides, both the kind of the offerings competition, which is a classical view on competition, but also on the resource side. And I'm looking at modeling that at the same time, so not only like the from the flat the competitive intensity in a certain industry, but really modeling the network structure of this competition, plus on competition on two sides of the firm, both the supply side and the demand side, and also doing some interesting modeling in that regard. So I think that like the highlights of the findings here is that the two networks are really quite they are related, of course. So there's a certain positive association with them, but they are still the coefficient is not that high, so they are really not interchangeable. And another interesting finding in here is that being embedded, so the kind of the network effect of sitting in this competition network is actually positive, which signals that kind of a product market health situations, all thrive or all fail kind of relationship. And then she also did a network disturbance model, and then you see that that model really focuses more on the random shocks in the system, and then the effect of those in this model of the network embeddedness and competition network is actually negative. So it kind of signals that whenever something happens, and if you're heavily intertwined, then then the focal point would really suffer from that. So it's also exactly what we saw with COVID disruptions and supply chain disruptions in there. So
Yes.
this effect is what you modeled in there. So a lot of
Yes.
cool projects.
Yeah. Great. So doing cool stuff with data that matters.
That is
that-
exactly what we do.
Going back to this. So, but maybe Xenia, I recall that you were one of the first to get involved in the JADS initiative when we started it more than 5 years ago. And if we may take you back to that time, so there was a dream at that point in time. So we had this vision, the two universities. Data science was one of the coolest type of activities people could study on the one hand side, and then there was the society in the large, so industry, but also, let's say, the public parties. They all had this idea that this entrepreneurship thing would be a good idea. So we are now 5 years later, 5 years older, 5 years more wise. If you would have to judge on how we manage to live up to the promise, what would be your feeling?
I think we learned a lot. That's my first reflection. And in many different ways. So you can see that, for example, also in the educational program. So of course, the master was one of the backbone parts of JADS right from the start. So it's been also a tremendous development trajectory with faculty of the two universities joining together, and then faculty, I mean like faculty members, not like faculties as departments, and there are 5 departments involved in the whole setup. So it's an immense if you think about it. I think the original ideas were very much focusing again on this kind of classical entrepreneurship vision. So that it's really kind of about starting the ventures, and all those startups will be booming and rising. And if I look back then, I think JADS did actually quite a good job, because we have 35 startups have been founded or currently being founded, are in the process of foundation by our students. So which is still a very interesting number. And some of them are also quite successful. Quite a number of them are still living, still kicking. This is also another interesting relevant performance metric. So they are there for sure. So it's not that the vision was wrong, but it was very kind of narrow in a way. And then what I see now is that we're broadening up to other entrepreneurial activities. So it's more about the entrepreneurial mindset also within the existing companies, new business development within existing companies. So if you generate new revenue streams, or if you come the costs for existing projects, you're also making business impact, and that also counts. So that movement is something that I also see.
And in terms of the young persons that you educate, so do you see a change? Maybe 5 years is too short to judge on it, but on the other hand, one could argue that this spirit, the general spirit, also with young people, to be self-propelling, to determine their own future, have their own company, that substantially grew over the past year. Does JADS keep up with that development? Do we anticipate enough on it?
I think we're more inclusive in a way. I also see that the students and that also the generations of students, they did change over time. So if I think about the first 2 years of the master program, then that was the kind of the real pioneers, because what is data science was not really known. So it's not, it's not only the entrepreneurship which was new, but also like the whole data science field was very, very new. So the students were were somewhat more risk-taking, I would say, in general. So and much more flexible also in their thinking, much more so just somewhat different. So and now I see that the groups are on one hand becoming larger. So the field of data science and the combination with entrepreneurship and business is also becoming more established. And what you see is that the students also become somewhat more strategic, somewhat more kind of, I wouldn't say completely risk averse, but they kind of, it balances up that risk taking. side of them, so they are more a bit more calculative, a bit more thoughtful in certain regards. So it's not that it's good or bad, it's just, you know, they've studied it, it's different, and maybe also more diverse. So maybe that's because they, you know, the very pioneering types, they're still in there for sure as well. But we also get the other kind of more conservative things, which is a good thing itself.
Of course, and
because
also
then it
the
becomes
balance is
mainstream.
interesting.
Yeah, because then it becomes mainstream.
Excellent. So thank you very much for bringing us up to speed. And so let's now engage, ladies and gentlemen, in a number of deep dives, as we call them. And we will feature other members of the unit.
Yeah, for sure.
And the first one we would like to introduce and invite to the table is Martine Williams. And Martine is working with us almost as of the beginning. So you are
another pioneer.
So 5 years is not too very long, but it is for JADS it's long. It's a lifespan almost. So Martine, maybe you could take us back to the moment in time when you decided to join us. What were your expectations, and how does your own field of interest, which is recommender systems, how does that fit in? But maybe first, how did you get to the point to decide to pursue a career at JADS?
Yeah, so that started earlier than JADS, I think, because it actually started with something you was one of the instigators, right? At the TU Eindhoven, we started very early with data science.
That's correct.
And at the time, so my background is actually very diverse. I'm an electrical engineer that was doing research on decision-making, human decision-making, and got involved in recommender systems around 2008 or 9-ish, when Netflix was still sending around DVDs that time.
Yeah.
And because of that, I got involved into data science when the TUE started it. And I got involved in the data science program, teaching the students about cognition and human decision-making. And then we wanted to found JADS in the malls. And I was really attracted to that because of my multidisciplinarity, right?
Yes.
So I see that there's an important connection to make between the actual data science and the society and the people that actually are touched by it. Let's call it like that.
Yes.
And I think at JADS, we have even more opportunities than I had in Eindhoven at the time to make that connection, to work with real data scientists on the one hand, but at the same time apply it to societal issues and entrepreneurial issues.
Yeah, that's great. Because some people think that data science is a new word for statistics. And that is not the case. So then the question pops up, what is the additional part? And indeed, you bring it up. It's the human-centric approach. And that also brings us to your field of interest, which is recommender systems. And I tend to recall that recommender systems is already, let's say, one could say the simple terms, it's an old subject, not in terms that it means that it is outdated, but it is already existing for
established.
More established. Thank you very much. So it's an established field, and I recall that it started with, let's say, making interactive television or giving overviews on television and recommend what people then, whenever the amount of channels grew, you needed to be assisted. So there were collaborative filtering type of approaches. So could you take us back to that moment in time?
That was long before I started in that field, and also I think even before I started my PhD. But so that's mid-90s, I think, and basically
that's correct.
These systems have always tried to solve the information overload problem that basically from that time on started, because we had more channels and more information. The internet came, Amazon started to selling stuff, and
that was
started to recommending
items.
And I think the field of recommender systems as a scientific field started around 2006. At least that was when the first recommender systems conference happened.
All right. Which is quite something, because that means that there is a community of practice,
Exactly.
and they would like to get together, and they apparently have a subject to discuss.
Yeah, and that started with, I think, about 60 people, and right now that conference attracts about 1,100, 1,200 people a year.
Amazing.
Of which about 70% is coming from industry.
70.
70. So
70.
like only 30% is
and
academic.
why is that the case?
So that's because it's a field where companies need all these tools, right? So Spotify, Netflix, but also Facebook, and all these companies, they need these tools to make their products more valuable and to handle the information overload and to help people make decisions and finding information. So it's very much sponsored by this field, but also because there's, I think, still a lot to solve in that field. So some people think recommended systems are a done deal, basically, right?
If I should, you may interrupt you, Martijn, because it was in the news lately that the center of gravity of much of the scientific research, and it was reflected by the number of patents that were generated, that it shifted more towards companies, or the private domain, than it was done in the public domain, you could say. Is that?
Yeah, so in this field
an
as well,
observation you
right?
share?
So, yeah, if you want to do good recommended systems research, you actually need a system, you need the users and all the data, and that's sometimes a bit hard for an academic research.
Yes.
Right. I do not have Netflix.
Yeah, you don't have access.
You don't own
I
it.
don't have access to all the data, right?
Yeah. And why didn't you move to Google or Netflix? Why did
I'm
you
really
stay
a
with that?
researcher, and I'm also very much interested in the human aspects, but also in the decision-making aspect.
All right.
I think I do. Let me see. I have.
Yeah, you have. Yep. Go ahead.
So I have a slide. This is actually from last year. So I got so much involved into this conference that although I'm not an algorithm person, I'm more a user-centric researcher. I was one of the general chairs of organizing the Vexus conference last year in Amsterdam. We were happy to host it in the bus of Berlage. We were one of the first hybrid conferences.
Yeah, and I can see that you explained the nature of the Netherlands to the audience.
Yeah, actually.
The windmill and
and the bridge. We had a very nice logo in the back, and we basically flew in half of the presentations, as you can see on the top right, via Zoom meeting, and the half of the other people were in the room. We had about 300 people there and 800 people attending online, and we tried to make this a really good experience for all of these people. But yeah, so it's a great conference because there's actually not just people building algorithms doing data science, but there's a lot of people actually also seeing how you can apply that to actual systems, to users, how we can help users to overcome all sorts of issues. And it's still a very difficult field actually to get good progress, because what we try to do in this field is to predict what people like. We have to predict people's preferences. You would say? The main challenge, first to try to predict it and then help them find or make decisions, right?
All right. Yeah.
And actually, as a psychologist from this field, I know it's almost impossible to actually predict what people like, because our preferences are fluctuating all the time. And actually, we come up with what we like by making decisions.
Yes.
So that means that these systems, you should actually make them such that people can interact with them and steer them also a little bit if they have different needs and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things you can still do. And that's also what my lab is doing at JADS. I do have a few slides on that, so let me see.
But maybe I may interrupt you again. We know this Davenport model about the different stages in analytics. And one of the top stages is what they call the prescriptive analytics. And there is even, let's say, a development going on to have an additional, that is even the 5th step, and they call that cognitive analytics. And the intention is to bridge the gap between what is done, let's say, in terms of the decision taking, the mathematical part of it, if you like, and then make this step or bridge the gap to what actually people really would like to hear as a recommendation. So the cognitive part. Does that ring a bell to you?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah. And what are we doing at JADS to let's say, contribute to, because I would say it's really difficult
Yeah.
Well, you already said it, to make some progress. So what is in terms of, is it from a computational perspective difficult, or don't we know how human beings act? Is the context too difficult to capture? What is happening?
So it's the context is definitely important, and people have been studying context a lot in the field. But it's the human being in the context, right? And that person has different needs and different desires and wishes in several different moments, and you have to support that in some way.
Yes.
And it's just very unpredictable. Actually, researchers in our field talk about the magical barrier, that there's only a limit to how well you can actually predict preferences. And I think the way forward is not to get the optimal model and make the optimal prediction, but basically to make a system that gives you decent predictions and then help to allow the user to actually be involved in those recommendations and have a sort of human in the loop AI, as we call it nowadays, where you actually engage with the system. But that means the system would have to understand the cognitive processes of the user and his emotions and everything to some extent. And then it becomes hard, because then that has to be part of your recommender model.
Yes.
And that's why we do research.
And it comes from a different discipline. So picking it up again, the kind of the interdisciplinarity perspective. So this is again, where the difficulty comes from, because normally researchers are schooled within one discipline, within one large knowledge area, and psychology is a very different field than.
Actually, that's true.
Yeah, I can imagine. And the type of models that you use, are they explicit or implicit?
What do you mean with explicit?
So implicit, we often refer to that we have learning systems. There is input, output, and we would like to capture the relation, for instance, done by machine learning or deep learning. And explicit means that there are features that you elicitate, and that you, let's say, either build confidence for one or another feature and try to make decisions from there.
We have both. So,
all right.
So explicit, I would say, content-based type of systems used to be the first systems that we would use, or knowledge-based systems. And if you're supporting more complex organizational decision-making, for example, then you often need those. But actually Spotify uses that a lot as well, because it uses audio features, content of the actual music to give you recommendations. And then there is the implicit, which is also the implicit behavior that we try to monitor and build models on that. But also we use models that indeed are hard to understand, like deep learning models. But actually the deep learning came in the field quite late, because we know recommender systems models have to be somewhat transparent. And so it's a very interesting field there, because it's typically combining both. Like the better models now actually are combining the implicit and the explicit. So that is what the algorithm people are doing. And if I look at my own research, we try to guide them also to think a bit further. So one thing we do in our lab, and that's actually something that I was able to develop at JADS, also having Yu Liang as my PhD student, is to help people move forward with recommender systems. So basically, how can we help people to develop new taste or new preferences?
Yes.
Or if you want to live more healthy, you actually don't want to do what you do now, but you want to do something better. And the thing is that the recommender system is always using historical data. So it's using the data how you used to be, right? And actually we even testing our models based on historical data. So Netflix is actually predicting how you would like the movie or the show months ago, not what you might like now. And we try to see if we can make models that actually try to take the progression of a person into account.
And maybe if we would stretch it, so let's say bring it into the perspective of, let's say, general artificial intelligence. So you built the perfect recommender system. Would we then arrive at a stage where we could replace, for instance, clinical psychologists?
Okay, don't get me started on clinical psychologists and sort of expert decision making, because they're a good example of how you can do better if you have simple models, I think.
Oh, that's interesting.
But in general, so recommender systems, as the field I'm in, are not typically not for sort of more complex diagnostical decision makers that doctors do, I think. And that's actually an area I would really like to do more work in the future as well.
I guess so, yes.
And then also, like my research on recommender systems, make that more interactive. And and basically make sure that you have a dialogue between the expertise of the decision maker and the expertise of the model, because both have their good sides. Let's say it like that.
Martine, thank you for being with us and sharing with us your enthusiasm about the subject. But I think you also made clear to the audience how important it is and how challenging it is. So as of today, one never should say, having listened to you, that recommender systems are outdated or simple. So they are definitely not. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
Okay. Then, ladies and gentlemen, we move on, and we have a next guest for the deep dive number 2, who is Werner Liebrechts. So Werner, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, Werner, you are also working with us with JADS for quite some time. And also we would like to hear from you the story. So take us back to the first time in your life when you heard about JADS, and tell us when it started exciting you.
Yeah, so I'm currently working for JADS a little over 4 years now. Yeah. So I'd say I've also experienced the vast majority of
the existence
of JADS. Yeah, so when did I first hear about JADS? That's when I was on the job market, the academic job market.
All right.
So in the final year of my PhD that I back then did at Utrecht University. And I scanned for job opportunities at a large variety of universities, and this one stood out, so to say. Yeah.
And what were the reasons we are anxious to learn from you and why it stood out?
Yeah, so what is so exciting about JADS to me is that it really combines the different disciplines from 2 mother universities. So I like the fact that we here build a new campus within the province of North Brabant, entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Yes.
Where we actually incorporate the knowledge and expertise of different types of people coming from different backgrounds.
Yep.
So it's too black and white to say that we have the people with the technical sciences knowledge from the Eindhoven University of Technology, and people with the social sciences knowledges from Tilburg University.
Yeah. So it's
because you also have an entrepreneurship group at Eindhoven, and you also have AI in Tilburg. But roughly speaking, it's what is brought together here.
And are we doing well in terms of that we are really leveraging on these 2 opportunities that we have from the different mother universities, as we often call it? Or do you have some advice to the leadership sitting at the table to improve on that?
And beyond. And beyond.
Beyond, yes.
Things can always go better, of course.
Know, yes.
But in a way, this comes naturally just by being co-located at the same time and place.
Yeah.
So here on this campus in Den Bosch.
We often refer to JADS as a startup university. So the entrepreneurial spirit is also within us as persons trying to really get into a next stage of maturity here. So
that's yet another reason why I was happy to join JADS, because my PhD actually at Utrecht University was about entrepreneurship, and I kind of see this as an entrepreneurial endeavor.
It is.
Both universities. So
it is great. So thank you for joining us. I do know that you have a very nice subject that you study with your PhDs. It's on social signal processing. Well, the signal processing field is very old. It dates back to Shannon and the early days, so it's more than 100 years old. But obvious, and also the social part, I dare to say, because psychologists have been using signal processing for a long time to study, let's say, the humans. But obviously, there is a new angle to it that you discovered. Could you take us alongside and explain to us what social signal processing in the year 2022 means?
Yeah, sure. So you're right in saying that the field of signal processing or even social signal processing can be seen as very old in a way. In a way, people have been sending signals to each other forever. So that has also grabbed the attention of scholars, looking at why do people do that, when, how, with what effects. and so on. But if we now refer to social signal processing as a term, we actually refer to the automatic detection and analysis of social signals or human behavioral cues, so to say,
Yes.
being sent during human-human interaction.
Yes. That's a nice definition. And that also bridges the gap then to computing facilities and making use of data in general, which brings it also to JADS again. Could you show us a few examples about this type of work?
Yeah, sure. First of all, it's good to mention here that I wouldn't call myself a social signal processing expert. I'm starting to become like one, I hope, in the nearby future. But I'm an entrepreneurship scholar. So it's me applying social signal processing techniques in an entrepreneurial context. So, and when, for example, do entrepreneurs meet each other or other people? Well, one prime example would be investor pitch competitions.
All right.
So that's where entrepreneurs, of course, meet investors, potential investors. And that's where the field of social signal processing could be of huge benefit for entrepreneurs as well as investors.
So you observe all type of clues and then bring them together in a model and draw conclusions from that.
So we talk about both verbal and non-verbal behavior.
Yes.
So you can even look at the verbal content of speech, for example, with natural language processing. But most often it's about detecting and analyzing the non-verbal behavioral part. So then we're talking about face and eye behavior, gaze behavior, gestures, posture, but also facial expressions. And that's the example that I'd like to share here. Previously, in the past few years, I've been recording student entrepreneurs pitching in a professional studio in the Gozes building.
Yeah, that's what we are looking at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to show here is the research setup that I used. Looks relatively simple. In real life, it was quite a hassle to make it work. Four cameras
at the same time,
running simultaneously, collecting the video simultaneously, so completely in sync. But this is what it looked like, and it also had some limitations, of course, because we wanted high quality videos for research purposes. So we restricted the startup team to send just one representative per team. There was limited use of space, so it was an idols-like spot on the ground that they had to stand in. There was a panel of 3 investors, real investors, attending and judging the pitches on the other side of the table, so with an evaluation sheet after each and every pitch. And this is a sketch, but this illustrates what it looked like in real life. So this is a screenshot of an overview cam that we also had running simultaneously. To be clear on this, I have informed consent of all these involved people that I'm allowed to share the screenshot and even the video later on.
Did you have to pass an ethical commission to get this up and running?
Yeah, I have actually been filling in over 30 pages of a data management document. Really explicitly saying who's going to work with the data, for what purpose, with what means, and so on.
And what did you find out?
So what we already knew is that these cues matter. So if we again think about decision making, so in this case it would be the investment decision, right? Or prior to that, the effort to conduct so-called due diligence. So what is an interesting concept in entrepreneurship research is passion. So you would expect that someone pitching is passionate about the business idea being pitched. But ultimately, it's about this passion being contagious. In a way, you want this passion to spread across the table so that the investors are as passionate or become as passionate as you are as an entrepreneur. And that's something we could try to find, for example, within nonverbal behavioral cues. Like, do they synchronize the nonverbal behavior? Do they mimic the other party? And if so, could this be a sign of emotions
Yes.
being contagious
Yeah.
towards the
Yeah,
other
and
side?
that makes us even more curious. What did you find out? So
Yeah.
are there cues that are more dominant than others? Is copying behavior, for instance, does it really work? So
Yeah,
are there even recommendations that you could give to young entrepreneurs in terms of their behavior to influence positively the other part of the table?
Yeah,
Just ask.
No, sure. So it's ongoing research.
Yes.
So I have to disappoint you a bit in that regard. Nonetheless, there is already a lot known about this. But the additional feature here is that I've also been recording the investors. So
Yes.
what previous research has been doing is they've been looking at the pitches. So first they just observed them, coded manually, those kinds of things. So that already improved, but the additional feature here is that I've also been looking at the investors on the other side of the table. And that way we can actually open up the black box of what actually happens. So you can link what happens on the entrepreneur's side to outcomes of a pitch and whether there is a positive relationship, if any. But now we can open the black box a bit and see whether this might be due to the investors perceiving the pitch in certain ways.
Yes.
And also expressing themselves accordingly. So this is the video output. So you've seen the real life setup on the previous slide. So this is the video output. So these videos run simultaneously. And if you look at the judge in the upper right corner, here at Spanbroek, actually, to be seen here, loaded into a facial expression analysis software program called FaceReader. Let me just start a movie, a small video. And then you can actually see that what FaceReader does is it attaches so-called action units to the face. So it indicates, for example, lip corner puller or cheek raiser. And it's actually most interesting to look at those action units in the face. Although FaceReader likes to translate it into emotions. So the 6 basic emotions on the right.
Yes.
Most often you see neutral. So that's the gray bar over there. But it, of course, becomes interesting if other emotions are being shown. And that's what you see happening over time.
Yes.
You could also guess, again, so those emotions were calibrated in somewhat different settings. So I think the interesting questions would be also to what extent they are representative of the pitching event and how professional emotional expressions differ from the classical that were trained before the camera. Now I have to look happy, now I have to feel sad. And this is how they calibrate those models. But this is the real life happening, and also the professional expressions of emotions. They also are very different from, for example, the free time spending or something like that. So really I think this contextualization of social signal processing is also very important, but also tricky, I guess.
So you can look at the raw data and like correlate time series and to see whether synchronization of behavior takes place or whatever. But of course, you always have to go back to the videos and see what were the important events over time. What actually happened there. Was there a joke in the pitch or whatever, that made them laugh?
Werner, what would you say is the holy grail in this field of research?
I cannot pinpoint one.
Okay.
There's so much I'd like to explore next still. So
what do students like? Because I know that you were also using these videos to kind of train to give feedback to students whenever they are students entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, whatever they pitched an idea to, how that was perceived. So what is the kind of the most interesting thing that the students learned and they reflected upon? Could you
so what I always say is that watching your own performance back is already very helpful in itself. So
and scary too.
That as well. So very curious to see what happened today on YouTube later. So that in itself is very helpful. But if you then, on top of that, add additional insights in terms of what kind of emotions were being triggered by your pitch.
From the investor side. So how they exactly?
Okay,
so they know the pitch, and then they see, this is how investors reacted, because usually they are either too much in the story or cannot focus on 3 at the same time, then I can also see the differences,
Yeah.
and one laughing, one not laughing.
I've even once supervised a bachelor's thesis actually that was looking at gaze behavior, and staring into the void actually positively correlated with a positive result. So,
oh, seriously?
A positive
So not focusing on one specific
Yeah.
investor,
Yeah.
and okay, so that they don't feel
instead of
excluded.
paying
That's a
attention.
great insight, yeah,
Yeah.
to use that and train on it. Yeah, great. Werner, maybe to wind up a little, so get back to JADS, and also to, let's say, your work and the way JADS, let's say, lives on its dream. What would be your recommendation for JADS in general for the next 5 years in terms of, let's say, education from your perspective, the research part, the entrepreneurial part? So could you please open up to us?
Yeah, that's one big question. So
I know.
let me try to keep it short. So first of all, me personally, I get most inspired from coordinating this course on startup entrepreneurship. So where we actually give our students a lot of freedom to set up their own venture, new venture, data-driven startup. What on top of that inspires me most is that students entering the course, I'm a bit skeptical. I'm not sure whether I'd like to be a startup entrepreneur myself. On the way, they find out that they might have a business idea in their hands that might take off. And to me, we should try to improve the trajectory that they go through as much as possible. So let's see whether we can enhance the support we give to them to actually create even more impactful startups than we already do now.
Yes.
It's not about quantity, but about quality.
Yep. Excellent suggestion. It's simple in wording and hard to achieve. So there is another 5 years for us to work on it. So thank you very much, Werner, for being here and sharing with us your thoughts and vision and positive attitude. So good luck with the good work, and bear with us. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have 2 more deep dives to go. They are coupled in a way. We are not going to say how, you will discover later. But the next guest that we invite to the table is Siping Ren. Siping, could you join us, please? Siping, you are a PhD student.
Yes.
And so that you are, we in the Netherlands consider that as the highest level of education. But you have been with us previously, so you did a master's at JADS, and there is a nice story that goes with it. So one question could be, what did you study during the master's? Why did you leave JADS after the master's? Why did you return to us? So could you enlighten us a little bit on your journey at JADS?
That was a rather lengthy journey. Thank you for asking it. So my first master after entering to Netherlands is to pursue a master in finance. And in the finance world, it's all about data.
Yes.
I don't have to tell you, banks are all about data. The financial market is all about data.
Very specific data.
Yes, there you understand data is really, really important for the modern economy and for business. And while I was learning a lot of things in finance, I also learned a new trend that's digitalization. Sometimes banks also consider it as a risk, consider about their own systems. So as we learn more about it, I started to pick up the trend that finance is not the ultimate money, but somewhere behind the data, somewhere behind the IT world is where we're heading as a society. And as I was approaching the end of the Master Finance, I learned Tilburg University put up a big advertisement for JADS at the front. I just happened to see it, and it sounds like perfect.
All right.
That was just a luck factor. So I signed up, and luckily I was qualified for the pre-master, and then I started with my JADS journey. And during my study, I learned a lot of things. And because that was the first generation, I was the first generation in JADS. So actually, it turned out I was the risk-seeking type of person. Yeah. And in my journey of studying JADS, because I already come from a finance master degree, so I also see this contrast between an emerging scientific field and a very established scientific field.
Yes.
So that was a very interesting observation for myself. And I kind of watched how JADS developed over time and how the field of data science developed over time. It was an interesting observation. But anyway, back to my own journey is I've learned various different things in JADS. And because thanks to the mother university support, I also get to study more supplementary to, or complementary to my own portfolio. I chose classes from the mother universities, and then I got to expand more. Thus, I felt like I learned a lot.
Yes. So you made use of the entire space, the two university and JADS in conjunction
Yes.
offers you as a student.
Yes.
So that's great. Did you ever regret that you didn't pursue the finance path?
To be honest, no, because when I was studying, when you're already studying in a field, you started to develop a vision of what the field is like and what the reality is also like. They teach you things of what you're going to know later on in the field. You get a sense of at what career development you're encountered with which type of problems. There I kind of see a lengthy journey if I had a career in finance. And frankly, I did not quite like it. The main reason I have to say is because it's lacking the innovative side. The financial systems are very complete and well established, very well regulated. There are a lot of risk seekers, even more than I am, that are trying to cheat the system.
Yes.
But the system itself is very established. There's not too many opportunities for you to be creative or innovative.
Yep.
But
so there was, you didn't want to be a banker, for instance?
Not really.
Not really. That's a great answer. I tend to know that app development is your field of study currently.
Yes.
And could you tell us a little bit more? So we all know what apps are. We work with them on a daily basis. So what is it that that is so challenging for you to deliver a PhD thesis on the subject?
Well, just a short clarification. This is the research project that I joined before I started my PhD, but this particular research project still has all the questions that you're asking.
All right.
So I'm going to continue from there.
Yes.
So the challenges of doing this research, at first I have to say, is to find where the position of the research really is. So when I have a big set of data, I know what is going on. I can do different types of analysis, but it's always important as a researcher to know what exactly you're looking at, what is the phenomenon that you're looking at, and what are all the relevant theories or mechanisms that backs up this whole phenomenon. So that's
but
really
that is a
important.
rather abstract description, at least for a person like me. So if there is, I know that you have brought some slides with you. So, but what is the research question you are studying, or the working hypothesis that you use?
The working, well, for this study, we took up innovative study paradigm. So we started with empirical exploration. And
Actually,
then,
we were surprised first.
Okay.
And then we were trying to understand what's happening. So
Yes.
Maybe good if you go
please
to
go
the
ahead.
example.
example.
Oh, yeah, the next slide. So.
Yeah. So when we look into the App Store, we notice there are plenty of apps and all of them ask for permissions.
Yes.
And very often, if you do read through the permissions, then you notice that they ask a lot. For example, in this case, why would a Flash app access your location?
Yes.
And this specific app is also has been negatively known, so to say, in the world. So if you look at the number of reviews that it has, it's actually in the millions. So it's 1.4 million. So it's a hugely popular app in the Google Play Store. And actually very well rated. So they almost have like 5 stars if you look carefully. It only does light up your camera, so use the flashlight, and it indeed asks for, very interesting things, including your location.
Yeah.
And storage. They also want to get access to it.
For which it is not clear.
Which has nothing to do with the
well,
functionality.
that's even a more bold statement. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
and
what
I think-
happens?
Yeah, and so what the project is about, essentially understanding how people react to that. So if you see that, do you stop downloading? Do you not? Or do people stop? I would not download this app, but it's me.
It's at least
in
annoying,
general-
all those questions that where you don't see the connection between the functionality of the app and what has been asked.
Yeah.
But can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I mean, just to add a little bit, I personally find this annoying because when they are trying to track my location, it also steals my battery. I want my phone to
yes.
last longer.
I never thought about it like that, but you are quite right. Yeah.
But, yeah, so from here, we notice that there are different types of permissions. Some of them are very necessary, essential to the app's functionalities, and some of them are not so essential to the app's functionalities. And on top of the, when you read through the permissions, you also notice that some of the permissions actually are very much related to your personal data. Your location is your personal data, but
Bringing phone status and identity is also,
I think, like, it happens that it's the case that in the screen, it's all about personal data. And thus, we wanted to make the distinction using data-driven methods to first, we want to distinguish the app permissions from data-sensitive, privacy-sensitive to non-privacy-sensitive permissions. And after we distinguish these permissions by this step is easy, just read them through and we know which one is privacy sensitive. The next step is more difficult. That is to classify which ones are necessary and essential for the app functionalities. So we use the topic modeling method, the structural topic modeling methods to make this identification. And we managed to identify apps who ask unnecessary privacy sensitive permissions and the ones who do not. And surprisingly, we notice the end result is people are actually reacting positively to the apps who are asking privacy sensitive permissions when they're even not essential to the app's functionality.
So-
Why?
I don't have a clue.
We didn't either. It took us quite some time to try to come up with hypotheses and try to understand how, if you, as ourselves as a user, how would we react to such a behavior? And we make up 3 possible effects that might be driving how the user make a decision. The first is when you present comparable apps, you don't choose which one is more privacy conservative. You choose the one who has the more download. And our analysis says, yeah, people do like this. Another possible effect is in front of you, there's a free app. There is a paid app. The paid app is more privacy friendly, but you want a free one. You want something for free, right? That's just a human behavior.
Yes.
And it's also present in our analysis.
Yes.
And a third effect is possible there is people actually misread the permissions as more intricate or advanced functionalities that are offered by apps. So when people get confused, they misread what's in front of them. They misread the evidence and they make the less optimal choices.
Yes.
So those are the things that we found from this study.
That's intriguing. That's great. So maybe to shift gears also this evening in this expert talk. Well, this is an example of an app. Apps are in the Play stores. So the big companies come in. So maybe this is a good point in time to invite another guest to the table, ladies and gentlemen. And you can stay with us, Siping, so that you can, let's say, engage in the discussion. So we would like to ask Sven to sit down. And so Sven, you are working at KPN. You are, well, you have different functions, I would say, or responsibilities. But if you listen to the story from Siping and then translate it to, let's say, the business case of KPN.
Mhm.
So where does your interest come in?
Yeah, so to align a bit more my role is within the IoT and data department. Previously, it was named the new business department, but since it is not that new anymore, it's now just the data and IT department.
Yeah.
And within that department, I'm responsible for our data propositions, and that's our different products where KPN helps our business consumers to get data or get more value from the data. But KPN is, for most of us, known as a connectivity player, bring internet, mobile, TV to your house, and up to now, and the area of apps and platforms and cloud was with the hyperscalers, Google, Azure,
obviously,
and more also with the recent crisis, we see how the European Union is bringing different acts in place to open that up a bit, and that's where it connects, because for that reason there's also becoming more opportunities for KPN to serve our customers with more, let's say, products that do more right to privacy, or to stay as a person or as a company in control of your data, because
and how should we as end users position that? Because KPN is for us as Dutch a really trusted brand. When your phone was connected through KPN, it was always working. So that's where it starts. And the connection between, let's say, these new business types. So with Google possibly in between or not, I don't know what the business case is. But is this connected to the primary business of KPN, or should we position it as, let's say?
No, it's definitely connected. So what we always did is connecting, and many big challenges we're facing currently, like healthcare or the energy transition, sustainable agriculture, all these types of challenges we're facing can be solved, or at least be improved with data, and especially exchanging or sharing data. And that's basically a new way of connecting companies and people. And what KPN is good at is, in a regulated market with right to privacy, etc., and security, connect people or companies. So different than and that still can be a rightful choice, but different than some other companies, we can within these boundaries, I would say, or as some companies would feel it's a boundary, KPN can help in that boundary, within that boundary, to exchange that data. And then you can think of data platforms, or if a company doesn't even have access to data, generate data with IoT and bring that data to your use case or application.
Now, we learned from one of the previous speakers when we discussed the role of the recommender systems, for instance, and then we drew the conclusion that much of the research was done by private parties like KPN. So the question that then pops up is, how do you connect with us as JADS and to CPing specifically in terms of, let's say, bridging between the two areas, the two fields of research, and also, well, the private and the public side? So what brings you to JADS?
To cooperate? Well, as mentioned, it is a pretty new field for KPN to look into data propositions, so basically my responsibility. And at the same time, a company is also focused on earning money, preferably today, and if not today, tomorrow. So I was making the joke, it's not that bad, but if I spend too much time on, let's say, looking into the far future and no money coming out from it today, then they will ask, can you maybe shift your focus?
Yes.
So inherently, research is more
Longer
longer
term.
term,
Yes.
and that requires also a long focus and spent for a long time on one subject, a lot of resources, and that cannot be done all by only a private company.
And how do you interact with Xiping and the work she's doing? Is that, or do you enable her to freely pursue her own research path, or is there some guidance from your side? And how strong is the guidance?
Well, how strong the guidance is, we should ask to Xenia or Xiping herself. But I would say that the best I can do is to be as transparent as possible about our business challenges within this field.
Yes.
So be open about internal challenges, external challenges, competitors. And from that, hopefully, the Xiping will derive a relevant research subject that will help us at the end. At the same time, I also hope that some freedom will get back to us, because it will be a more, let's say, neutral or objective. Research must be objective, and a company, and also myself, although I don't believe that I still have some academics that somewhere in my head, that I'm not that objective anymore, because the only goal I have is to find new business models for KPN.
Yes.
And I also have a strong belief in certain business models for KPN, but bringing some, let's say, outside in view, especially from the academic world, how you see, broadens that view, or
obviously
shifts that view.
And how does it work in your unit then, Xenia? So there is a lot of debate in the Netherlands between the involvement of the private parties, with the emphasis on they shouldn't be steering the academics too much. But on the other hand, we would like to be inspired,
engaged
and engaged in things like that. So what is your opinion? Are we doing good at that part?
I think this is something that is really also imprinted in our DNA pretty much. So I think, if I can say for all the people that I know, which I largely know working in around the JADS, that they do like to do research that is anchored in the practical world, in the business world. So we have this famous saying that the best theory is the practical kind of theory. So that's also again something that we stand by and we do. And this is, I think, also a very nice example where you see that these interactions are happening. So these, for the research, the ideal problem for research should be indeed challenging, long-term, important but not urgent kind of tasks. Exactly, if you look at that, the classical classification, this is exactly what seems to be happening with the IoT and platforms strategy within KPN. So it's we had quite a number of very interesting, I think, sessions on understanding what are the key challenges and zooming into them. And at our side, Xiping has been pulling through the platforms studies, because that's also a booming field of research within social sciences in broad sense. And then you can already see what is already known on the subject, so that can be shared. So that's also the kind of the media, the quick win, so to say, that KPN team can already capitalize upon, and then start working on that, improving the strategy, and then we can jointly formulate the research, which will have practical value, but will be also interesting from the scientific perspective. So it's the best of two worlds in many different ways, but also from the scientific and the practical side. So that's,
and Xiping, you disclosed that you were a risk-seeking person. Is the risk that KPN provides you with sufficient?
I must say, yes. I have encountered a number of challenges along my very short PhD journey.
Started 2 months ago.
But the first impression is it's very important. But
so let's to start with, it's a merit to have access to a very novel thing that is going on in the industry and trying to be promoted in reality. Otherwise, the academic world doesn't really have the access, and in which case I think that's a real real seeking behavior.
Could you give us an example of something that you discovered at KPN in these 2 months? that you weren't aware of previously?
That she discovered at
Yes.
KPN side that she wasn't
Yeah.
aware of it.
Well, maybe time is too short, but
I suppose it's how innovative every company is trying to be, like, but they still try to see like how they could still strategically to say how the innovation is relevant for the existing company,
Yes.
existing business
Yes.
ventures. So I think that's the part that kind of surprised me quite to some extent.
Yep, that's interesting. And then maybe we can reverse the question to Sven.
Right.
And ask you whether or not you have the feeling that the persons at JADS are living up to your expectations, because you connected us, because you had this impression that we would know, at least from a different angle, what is out there, and so a benchmarking part maybe, or novel technologies or whatsoever. So what you discovered, so what did you discover at JADS that you weren't aware of previously?
Well, maybe not on the level of a specific technology or something that's going on, but what for me up to now is the most valuable actually is the discussions we had, but in a very structured, let's say, more objective and academic way. So what I noticed due to the conversations we had is that during, let's say, regular business discussions, a lot of things go across each other. So we're talking in one moment about the technology, and then suddenly about the finance and the business model, and then back to the strategy. And it really is fruitful and enlightens the discussion if it is, let's say, more try to fit it more in certain models or layers of to layer the problem basically we're facing. And to me, actually, some valuable outcomes were from the conversations that were initially were set up to exchange information between JADS and KPN, but ended up in being the most valuable for the information that was shared between the same people from the same company due to these structured discussions.
That's an interesting statement.
So yeah, I would say that bringing theory back to the table of the, let's say, day-to-day business is, for now, in the first 2 months only, the most valuable I've experienced.
Yeah, no, that's already something, I would say. So we could elaborate on that even more. And you brought in, I think it was Ping in her presentation, this notion of the Google Play Store. Does that still play a role also in connection with the work you do for KPN?
Well, the connection is not too strong, but they are both platforms.
Yeah.
And there is one thing that actually all the platforms should pay more attention to is how they're interfacing with actual business or actual like value streams and the people who really need to use them. And Google Store is a very easy, I would like to say an easy case because it's B2C and you can only expect so many things from individual users.
Yeah, business to consumer, yes.
However, if it's a platform from a B2B setting, then you're expecting different behaviors from companies, and that is less well defined than individual persons, because companies, on top of behind each company there is a person. They also have different let's say value objectives, so that's different, and that's very difficult to get a feeling of how you should structure or strategize over your platforms.
Yes, great. Yep.
That's a really nice example indeed. So as I mentioned before, so the products we deliver to the business markets are basically currently focusing on 4 of those values, or the customer just wants access to his data. So getting it connected, delivering it to the customer, and that's it.
Yeah.
Getting control on their data. That's something we are, let's say, more developing now, that we want to bring something to the table or some value to the table on that field. trusting that data.
Mhm.
When data is more and more becoming a crucial part of business decisions, you want to be sure that the data is available in the right format, etc., etc. And that's something which really connects to KPN, because we start with, let's say, the source with the connectivity, and we're the first, let's say, part of the chain that can guarantee if the data arrives, because if the connectivity is down, then everything behind that can be up and running but failing. So
there is also another I think interesting angle. You briefly touched upon that, and that is the specific position that Europe takes in the interplay between, let's say, what is going on in Asia, China. On the other hand, we have, of course, the big companies in the US, and we have a few acts in Europe. There is the GDPR Act. There is the new one on human-centric and trustworthy AI. And I could imagine that KPN tries to build on the uniqueness of those acts. So use them to your benefit within Europe, to leverage also on the trusted brand that you have. Is that a correct observation?
So within the data world, KPN is a very small party, right? In the Netherlands, we are a bit big telco, but a large part of the revenues come simply, that's no secret, from the connectivity, from the very basic connectivity. But the unique position we have is that we indeed have the trusted brand, and also from that connectivity can create, let's say, trust and guarantees on that data. And at the same time, in Europe, there's a trend going on that we want to become more independent, let's say, on how we want to get value from the data. So basically, you need two things. Maybe I'm too simple in this, but you need some infrastructure to analyze or do something with the data, and the data itself. Well, the data itself, we're not generating data, or we're just transporting it, but the infrastructure itself is now all with a few big parties outside the EU. So the EU is putting some accelerators in place, initiatives like Gaia X that needs to make the infrastructure more open and create a single data market. So those are in accelerators, and at the same time they bring some regulations, as Europe is always doing, to also keep competition fair, protect the people within the EU. And these two things at the same time create a unique opportunity for companies like KPN, but also other telcos in Europe we're cooperating with, to at least start offering an alternative. I'm not saying we're going to compete with Microsoft or something. I mean, but on a specific, like the products that I'm responsible for, we can look into, okay, how can we bring an alternative that fits with these regulations and compliance.
And the Microsoft of this world will have a hard time to, let's say, comply with the acts.
I think they, with the amount of money they have, they can do it tomorrow. The only thing that helps with let's say, creating more competition, that there also becomes a bit more room for other parties. So
which is, of course,
it's an illusion that they will not be able to comply, because with the GDPR, Facebook, for example, really quickly was able to comply. But together with that, there are also becoming more alternatives.
So let's look in, I would say. So for quite a number of discussions that we had was on the nature of network effects and the platform, and the danger and the power of that, but also the weaknesses associated with that. Because if you want to scale up a platform, it's working against you. Once you have a grown platform, it's really helping you to prosper and become even stronger. So the large become even larger.
Yeah.
So that regulation is probably helping to at least get mitigate that effect of the
Create a
blockades
level playing
due
field a
to
little
the
bit.
network
Yeah,
effect.
yeah.
It's again very similar to the regulation in the Netherlands on
Mhm.
telcos. I mean, there are
Mhm.
2 or 3 big parties,
Mhm.
but then a lot of smaller parties
Yeah.
and they can only exist because it's regulated.
Yes,
So
yeah, and they can make a living
let
there.
us be one
Yeah.
of those smaller parties for data within the EU, and that's still
Yeah.
a whole new opportunity for KPN.
Excellent. Given time, my dear guests, because it's almost 9 o'clock, thank you for being here. Thank you,
Very
Xenia,
nice
for
discussion,
hosting this event and bringing so many nice angles to the table that your unit is working on, but also where we can see that you take great responsibility at the heart of JADS, which is really great. So the best of luck with all the good work that you are doing.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for facilitating the discussion. So,
Yes,
it's all
well,
about asking good questions, and that was
well,
also very.
I do my
very
best.
well
So sometimes it works. So, ladies and gentlemen at home, thank you for being with us. We will have the next expert talks on the 12th of May, where we then will discuss the last and third unit of JADS, which is led by Erik Posma. And then again, we have different guests and different topics and different talks. Thank you for being with us and have a pleasant evening.